Hi guys, here's the latest at this nursing home where we're set up this evening. We know of two people here who tested positive for coronavirus. One is a healthcare worker in her 40s. The other is a patient in her 70s. Both are being hospitalized. And the concerning element here is that neither have any known travel outside of the country or contact with people in other states who've tested positive for coronavirus. So a mystery here that they're still trying to get to. Behind me is an ambulance that just pulled up. They loaded a patient into there a few moments ago. That's the second ambulance that we've seen pull up today. The workers, the paramedics, are wearing protective gear, as are some of the people who work inside the building. Many of them are wearing masks. Public Health King County says more than 50 others associated with Life Care, with this facility, are sick with respiratory issues. They're being monitored and tested for coronavirus. Some have been quarantined. Now, family members have been showing up throughout the day to visit as they normally would on a Saturday. Some did not know about what was going on here. Others were concerned and wanted to pay their family members a visit. But they're being turned away as soon as they show up at the front door and given a sheet, an info sheet about coronavirus to help inform them. But some people said they just weren't really getting any answers about what's going on or whether their family members may have been exposed to this virus. So a lot of questions here. This is still a developing situation. I should mention both people who tested positive for coronavirus are still in the hospital. The healthcare worker is in satisfactory condition and the patient is in serious condition. So, given all that's been going on here today, it's actually a remarkably calm scene. Some of the workers have been coming and going and chatting with us outside, and they didn't seem too alarmed, and many of the family members said they trusted that the people in charge here are doing what they're supposed to do to make sure that the patients here are taken care of.